Hi there and welcome to part 8 of my Grand Bookshelf tour, and in this installment I'll be focusing on a single writer, William S. Burroughs. Now, as regular viewers of the channel may be aware, Burroughs is one of my favourite writers, and I first got into his work over 30 years ago, and I remain just as passionate about his writing today. Now, why is that? The chief reason, I would argue, is that Burroughs was a prophet. Writing in post-World War II America, he was able to foresee the kind of dystopia we would be living in today. And I think Chris Hedges, another hero of mine, summed up the kind of society we're living in now very well when he wrote this. We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy. And what the Hedges quote shares with Burroughs is this radical skepticism towards all kinds of authority, and what you also find in Burroughs is an absolute commitment to personal freedom, and that will always command my attention, so I'll always be engaged with the work of Burroughs. So now let's go on and I will share with you my Burroughs material. Let's begin, and first we have this. And the Hippos Were Boarding Their Tanks by Burroughs and Kerouac, their collaborative novel. This is for the completist only. I would suggest something of a curiosity and not particularly interesting. Then we have the Yage letters, Burroughs and Ginsberg, and this is the edition to have because it's edited and has an introduction by Oliver Harris, who's the foremost scholar on Burroughs, and he's worked with the Burroughs estate to reconstruct the process of creating this text. And he notes that the letters were never really sent, for the most part, from Burroughs in South America. It was very much a contrivance, a literary device. And the letters themselves are fascinating. It's all about Burroughs' search for Yage, the vine of souls, ayahuasca, very popular today, incidentally, and he believes this will be the ultimate fix. Doesn't quite work out that way. Then Burroughs' take on the Western, The Place of Dead Roads, one of his finest novels. I really enjoyed this, and it's kind of influenced by Denton Welsh to a degree. This one, some of the characterization, he believed he was channeling the voice of Denton Welsh while writing this. Then another Welsh influence on this, The Western Lands, one of his final works. This draws on Egyptian mythology, a recurring theme throughout Burroughs' work, and this is very satisfying, although there is a kind of wish fulfillment, understandably, in this. A man at the end of his life, so it's very idealistic, even by Burroughs standards, in its depiction of childhood and adolescence. Then Queer, which has another great introduction. This one is the 25th anniversary edition, and this sort of explains quite why Queer took so long to emerge. This one is really good, full of great writing, actually, on a par with Junkie, in my view. Then we have this, The Wild Boys, a sci-fi novel published in 1969. This is a real riot, pun intended. Burroughs wrote it full of enthusiasm after the global uprisings of 1968, and this was his vision of how those uprisings might come to fulfillment. Gangs of wild boys roaming the land. It's excellent. I also want to note that I love these Grove Press editions for the colours and for the typography. I used to have all of them. Now I'm just reduced to owning a couple. Beautiful books. Then letters, rub out the words, and actually Burroughs' letters are particularly interesting. Writers' letters are not always so fascinating, but his really do throw a lot of light on his work, and they are quite amusing in their own right too. Then short stories, or short pieces I should say, Interzone. This has got some of my favourite Burroughs writing. There's a real thick anthropological quality to some of the pieces here that I really enjoy. Then another Grove Press edition of Nova Express, one of the cut-up trilogy. I bought this in South Kensington, I think it was, in a used bookstore about 7 years ago on my honeymoon. I've owned many copies of this over the years. I really enjoy this one. There's a Kafka element to this one with this idea of the biologic courts where species are kind of put on trial. This one's excellent. Then, possibly Burroughs' best book, Junkie. I know he really hated the idea, like most writers do, that his debut was his best work, but this is really superb. Just one of the best books about drug addiction ever written, right up there with De Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater. I can't recommend it enough. It's hard-boiled, like a Raymond Chandler detective fiction, but it's also got these very surrealistic elements with the junkie having these strange visions in New York City. Then Blade Runner, which was appropriated for the movie adaptation of Philip K. Dick's To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep. I bought this in Taiwan off Yahoo. I couldn't believe it, and it was very, very cheap. This is not easy to get hold of. It's a screenplay for an imaginary movie, and it really is very relevant in the age of COVID. It comes at a time where health systems have collapsed, and so a black market has emerged for medical treatment. It kind of runs with that scenario. It is really stimulating, even though it's very short. And this has a beautiful cover as well. It's got a real guerrilla quality about this edition. It's tiny. Then Burroughs' most famous novel, Naked Lunch. I have a few editions of this that I'm going to show you now. This one is the one to have from a reader's point of view. It's the restored text, and it's edited by James Gramerholtz and Barry Miles. And Barry Miles wrote an excellent biography of Burroughs that we'll come on to. This is not the version I read back as a 20-year-old in my village in the Midlands. I'll put a picture of the copy of that up in the corner. Rather psychedelic, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, although this is Burroughs' most famous novel, it's not where I'd recommend anyone looking to get into his work to begin. For that, Junkie is definitely the best point of entry for Burroughs. Then, another Naked Lunch. This one is absolutely battered, but it does say on the front something like, yes, the first paperback edition of the complete Grove Press text, and that's why I picked it up. Then, my traditional Chinese version of Naked Lunch. This is a real rarity, I guess, for anyone out there in the West. It was put together by a professor based in Taiwan. The cover is a still from the set of Cronenberg's movie adaptation of Naked Lunch. This one opens the other way, yeah, because it's Chinese and goes up and down. The notes are really good in here. It has some notes written in English that I found very useful. Okay, then we have this, Minutes to Go, one of the collaborations with Brian Gysin. This is worth having if you're really into Burroughs. Very short. It's got the poetry based on permutations there. Okay, so it kind of links with the historical avant-garde. What does this say? Calling all reactive agents, calling all reactive, agents calling all active agents calling all reactive agents. Yes, trying to exhaust all the possibilities of a phrase. That was Brian Gyson's interest. This is one of my favorites, especially for the cover. Pookie's here. It draws upon Mayan cosmology, has a Mayan glyph there, and as regular viewers of the channel may know, I spent 5 years in Guatemala, and I read this book while sat in Mayan ruins in Guatemala and on the Yucatan Peninsula. So I'm probably a member of a rather select band who has actually done that, read these while sat on the Jaguar Temple. This is great. It centers on trying to obtain the secret of immortality, which is a recurring theme in Burroughs' work. So you have the ugly American, as it were, who forbids all mention of death in his household, and he's convinced that Mayan cosmology offers an escape from mortality. That is picked up on also in the Western lands. Then the Burroughs File, a beautiful Grove Press paperback. I can't say enough about how wonderfully produced this is. Anyone into Burroughs has to have a copy of this. It's got pages from his diaries, his journals, and snatches of, from little movies and photographs that he's taken. Not only that, some of the pieces are excellent too. There's one about a car crash that is absolutely amazing, I have to say. Okay. Then, another novel, often rated as his best, Cities of the Red Knight, in this rather nice Picador edition. Yes, I am a big fan of this one too. It's his take on a plague, an erotic plague, rather like monkeypox, it has to be said. Burroughs' writings about viruses really have become much more of contemporary concern, obviously, since COVID, but there doesn't seem to have been any renewed interest in his works. I think that's because so much of his writing is simply unpalatable, given the fact that we're living in this cancel culture these days. But personally, yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Okay, that is all of the novels. And now we'll move on to books about Burroughs. Please forgive me, I've just noticed there are a few more books featuring Burroughs' writings sprinkled throughout this next pile, but no novels, has to be said, so that part was true. And we start with one of them here. It's his take on Time magazine, with lots of collage and cut-ups here. And it also features the wonderful calligraphy there of Brian Gysin, his collaborator. Next, an anthology of cut-up writings put together by Joe Ambrose, who sadly passed away just a few years ago. Only Burroughs' cut-ups are really stimulating. It rather shows that he's a magician when it comes to using this technique, whereas for other people, it doesn't really produce much more than a kind of gibberish, the stuff you get out of those online cut-up generators. Then, Letters of Burroughs, another volume. Which ones are these? 45 to 59. So the one I showed in the previous pile was rather later. These are in the post-war period. Then, The Magical Universe of William Burroughs. And this is really a very strange project. It simply collects together in one place all of the mentions of magic scattered throughout Burroughs' texts. It's not actually of great interest. It has a few good pictures though. Then Critical Works. This is one of the best. Word Cultures by Robin Leidenberg. And it's beautifully produced. You could throw this off the top of a skyscraper and it would survive intact. These essays are great. What you'll find with the Critical Works is there's no one book that offers a great overview of the entirety of Burroughs' output as a novelist. You rather have to put them all together and then choose what you want to take from each one. This deals very well with the cut-up trilogy. Oh, another copy of this because Book Depository managed to mess up delivering it. So there are two of those floating around. Then The Lost Years of William Burroughs, for fanatics only. It goes into his time in South Texas and puts together accounts of Burroughs' time there from historical documents and even by chasing up people that might have encountered him during that time when he was trying to become a marijuana farmer and it wasn't working out very well. Then, this huge book, Burroughs Live. It's all, well, it always says all, doesn't it? But it's rarely exhaustive, but it's a lot of interviews with Burroughs. And the main drawback of this book is it's on this horrible paper, like it came out of a laser printer. I was really amazed to see that because I thought this book would be wonderfully produced given its price. Then Biographies. This is one of the best ones, I think. It's Ted Morgan's. It has a great cover and it's just a wonderful read. Burroughs is one of those writers whose life is every bit as interesting as his writing, and actually his life penetrates his writing and his writing penetrates his life. You know, you can't draw a sharp line between the two, so this is extremely readable. Then one of the most authoritative critical works, it's by Oliver Harris again. This is excellent and it's got that wonderful picture of Burroughs at the British Museum, I believe, in the Egyptian exhibition. Yes, this is great. It's deep, but it's very, very stimulating if you want some critical perspective on Burroughs. Then we have William S. Burroughs at the front, and this is a collection of essays, and in truth, the early contributions here have not aged well. They're basically attempts to prove that Burroughs is worthy of critical attention, a battle that was never really successfully won and would need to be refought in the present cultural climate. Some of the later essays, though, are interesting. Then, this is great. With William Burroughs in the bunker, I think this is preferable to the live collection. Yes, because you don't have to go through such a quantity of interviews to find the gems. This one is just full of gems. It also has many photographs too. This is really nicely produced with Victor Bockris. Then an essential text if you're into beat writers, it's the Paris Review. Beat writers at work, rather solipsistic, it has to be said, not a patch on the Latin American writers at work Paris Review anthology, but still a great introduction to some of the other figures in the beat movement. And I do like the interviews in here. Well, this one is with Charles Olson, who also spent a considerable amount of time in Guatemala, like myself. Then a short biography. It's one of these reaction books. I really recommend these reaction biographies because it really is the facts and just the facts. I've got the one on Genet as well. It's a great way of getting a quick overview of a writer's life and works. The covers are not really that inspiring, but when you've got, 7 or 8 of them on the shelves, they do begin to look better. Then, great cover on here, William S. Burroughs in Mexico. And this was written by a Mexican. And this is the English translation, and it's absolutely terrible. What a terrible translation. I went back and read the Spanish instead, and that was much more comprehensible for me. This is just really bad. But again, it's for the completist, so the general reader probably won't be picking that up. Then the Twain authors book on Burroughs, rather dry, as you'd expect from the Twain. Great picture of Burroughs, though, on the cover, looking every bit the Southern gentleman there. Then Barry Miles with his Burroughs biography, El Hombre Invisible. That was the nickname given to Burroughs by the Spanish street children in Tangiers on account of his rather spectral presence. This is a straightforward read, gives you all the facts that you'd want to know about Burroughs and his works. Yes, highly recommended. Has a great cover as well, has to be said. There's a Ginsberg biography also by Barry Miles. Then, more of a curiosity, Eric Mottram's The Algebra of Need, criticism of a highly personal kind, no footnotes, no index, and I love everything about how this book was produced. Look at that inside. It's like it was made on one of these IBM machines in some radical's basement in the 1960s. That is just great. And I have a friend who's a poetry professor who is acquainted with Eric Mottram and assures me he's a wonderful gentleman. Then another book, rather like In the Bunker with Burroughs, The Job, which is better than reading through thousands of pages of interviews because this one is just so concentrated. It's with a guy called Daniel Odier, who wrote novels himself under the pseudonym of Delacorte. Very few people are into those novels, but I absolutely love them. I might buy them off eBay and review them for the channel. They're absolutely wonderful. They're extraordinary. They just break every social convention. They're very amusing and sophisticated. Yeah, they're great. So this one, The Job, is a must-have. Then we have this, Timothy S. Murphy, Wising Up the Marks, the A-modern William Burroughs, a more recent critical work. And although this is good, it draws for a lot of its literary theory on Deleuze. You have to bear that in mind if you're going to try and understand just what Murphy is talking about. But for all that, there are moments of clarity, of lucidity that do throw fresh light on Burroughs' texts. Yeah, this was a good read on the whole. So there we have it. Those are all the Burroughs related materials I have out here with me in Taiwan. Just a few bits and pieces, as it were. I hope you enjoyed me sharing them with you. And now all that remains is for me to bid you farewell. So be safe, be strong, and I shall see you anon. Nanu nanu.